We really should have waiting parents, not waiting children. Over 100,000 children are available for adoption through the U.S. foster care system, and 27% don't have anyone, like a relative or foster parent, in the process of adopting them. 60% are between the ages of 5 and 17, and 2/3 are part of sibling groups of 2 to 8 children. Hey listener, my name is Marcy Bursack. My husband and I chose adoption as our plan A. After blogging about our journey adopting a sibling pair, I began mentoring families right in my own living room. That passion grew into the Forgotten Adoption Option, a nonprofit I now lead as a volunteer while working full-time in the tech industry. From my blog, 3 books, app, and classroom lesson to now a 45-minute course called Foster Care Adoption Simplified, which you can find at ForgottenAdoptionOption.com, I've created practical, heartfelt resources to help families navigate the foster care adoption process. As you listen to this episode, I encourage you to ask yourself, who in my circle needs to hear this? It's often people in what we call helper professions, people like therapists, nurses, doctors, police officers, firefighters, social workers, and teachers like my husband. These are the people who tend to step forward to adopt children from foster care. But this work isn't only about becoming an adoptive family, it's also about becoming an advocate and ally. Every waiting child deserves not just a forever family, but a community of people who champion their future. Whatever led you to this podcast, I am thrilled that you are here. My mission is simple, to help every waiting child be with their forever family. And that's exactly why I host this podcast.
Welcome to the Forgotten Adoption Option podcast. In this episode, we will discuss the need for adoptive families for children in the foster care system. It's like the Forgotten Adoption Option is like doing its thing. This is so exciting. When my husband and I got licensed to adopt through foster care, we were one of the very first families for our licensing worker, and her name is Summer. Fast forward, Summer continues to be a sounding board and helpful connector to me in many ways, including she reviews sections of books that I publish. I want to make sure they're accurate. And then she also helps me connect to people for my podcast. And that's how we're going to talk about today's guest. I've really been wanting to introduce you all to an innovative program that actually began in my home state of Missouri. I'm very proud of them for this. And thanks to Summer, that's what we're doing. So meet Summer's colleague, Amanda. Hey, Amanda.
Hi, thanks for inviting me to be here today.
I am so excited. This is like a best kept secret, but like in the best of ways. So I'm like, everyone know about this program. So Amanda, she's the director over the Extreme Recruitment Program, and the organization she works for is called the Foster and Adoptive Care Coalition. Amanda herself is half adopted, or I could say Amanda is herself half adopted. It kind of sounds funny when we say it that way. And as of a few months ago, she's actually become the kinship placement for her niece. So she has a lot of like lived experience in different angles in this space. She's been working in child welfare for more than a decade, first as a recruiter and now as the director of this unique and intensive approach to finding permanent homes for children in foster care who are considered hard to place due to age, special needs, and length of time in care. And I think just pointing those 3 things out alone helps people understand like, well, why aren't the kids getting placed? Again, it's due to age, special needs, and length of time in care. This has nothing to do with the child and their behaviors. It has everything to do with just the other factors. So the program we're going to talk about is called Extreme Recruitment. So Amanda, people are going to first want to know like this whole half adopted thing. You're going to have to explain yourself in that. So maybe we should start there. What does half adopted mean?
Yeah. So when I was younger, my mom and my biological dad split up when I was about 8 months old. And to be honest, that really ties a lot into even just my passion for child welfare, because I think back a lot that if my mom hadn't made the hard choice to leave a domestic violence relationship when I was a baby, like I very well could have been one of those kids that came to the attention of CPS, just like, you know, my mom's family did and my dad's family did. But anywho, she left. She found the power to leave and was really committed to giving me a stable childhood. And so within that, she met my adopted father when I was 2, the only father I've ever known. And my parents really like to tell the story about how I asked to be adopted. But
That's adorable.
the gist is like, I wasn't okay that my mom was going to have a different last name than me. And that didn't make sense to me. I was 5 at the time. And so I was just kind of like, how do we change my name? And so it started a conversation with my parents, and then they went through the process. And so I was adopted when I was 5 years old, and my name was changed, and I had a part in that and went to court. And That was just kind of the story from there on out.
You were very much participating in your own life,
Mhm.
which is huge. And I think about when I think about more of like the teens that I've interviewed on the podcast, and them sharing their own story. There's actually some folks that are part of this season that they actually ask someone to adopt them. And so I love that you've been part of like doing that,
Mhm.
like that exact thing of like, please, I want to be part of this too. That's so sweet. So we've got a little bit about your background as a life, but how did you go from growing up this way and then going into child welfare and then now working at the coalition? What was that sequence?
Yeah. So like I kind of spoke, my mom, she came from a pretty unstable family. I had an uncle that was in foster care and was adopted that my mom didn't find again for years. She emancipated herself when she was 17, and just kind of fought life on her own, if you will. But I was just so lucky. You know, my mom really believed strongly in breaking the generational trauma in her family. And she did that with me, very much so. But I was also blessed in such a way that, like, she was pretty honest with me about it. You know, I was always naturally, as I think most social workers are, just really drawn to people who needed a little bit of extra help, who like maybe didn't quite fit in. You know, a lot of my friends were, those kids. And so I think she really saw that in me, and she really was age appropriately honest with me that, she didn't have a great childhood, that her childhood wasn't very stable. Like I knew from a young age that she didn't graduate high school because she had emancipated herself and nobody could sign the paperwork. The whole reason she didn't have a high school diploma was she didn't have a parent to sign to enroll her in school.
Wow.
And she told me those things um, not from a place where she was still in that trauma, but more in a place of like, I've done this for you and I want us to keep doing this for our family. I want you to have better grandparents than what I was able to give you. I want to keep breaking, these cycles in our family. And that and a little bit of that old show, Judging Amy, really inspired me to work with kids in foster care. Before that, I wanted to be a teacher. Um, and I remember talking to my mom one day and being like, what happens to all the kids that fall through the cracks, though? Like, I don't know if I could teach a whole class if there's like that one kid that's really struggling. Like, that's who I would be worried about. And so she introduced me to the show Judging Amy for, what it's worth. It's not all accurate. And I just learned a little bit through that about the system, about the fact that there were kids who were in foster care who, didn't get emancipated or weren't living with their parents. And that's kind of like all she wrote with that. When we had our opportunity in high school to shadow jobs, I shadowed our local children's division office. That's where I went. I wanted to learn more about the system, more about kids. And it just kept going from there. So I went into social work. I worked in a residential facility while I was in college for undergrad and grad. So I got to work with some of my introduction to actually working with kids with some of the hardest kids, some of the highest behaviors with the highest amount of trauma. Um, and again, I really enjoyed that experience, but I didn't like that I couldn't help affect change, or it didn't feel like I could as much. So when I got my MSW, I applied and started working at a local agency as a case manager in foster care. And so that was my first real step in the child welfare, was being a case manager. And I did that for about 3 years. Most of my kids went home to their parents. I was able to help reunify a lot of families. And then I had a couple that were adopted within their family. And that was really special to me. But back then, as a case manager, we have another really innovative program called 30 Days to Family. And so I had a case as a case manager with 30 Days to Family, and that introduced me to the coalition and introduced me to family first philosophy and the importance of keeping families connected when kids have come into foster care. And so I was just keeping my eye on the coalition for a while. And then about 10 years ago, they were ready to come out of the pilot program for extreme recruitment that had been created and expanded within a increased budget that we got from the state. And so I was hired on as one of three to help expand that extreme recruitment program 10 years ago here at the coalition.
And when you started expanding it, did it go from kind of St. Louis Metro across Missouri, or where did expansion go?
No, it stayed in the St. Louis area, but the pilot program initially had it was just kind of like a hypothesis of how could we get kids out of care and be adopted. And so they created a model. It was piloted, it was funded. They had, things they had to answer to. And so at the time that I came in, that pilot was ending and they were just realizing what worked and what didn't. And so what was exciting was I came in at a time where they were really ready to really build the program, looking at, for example, the biggest easy to understand thing from that is that in the pilot program, it wasn't set up to follow families to adoption. The recruiters found families for kids, they matched kids, and then they kind of handed that off to the current child welfare team to get to adoption. And they were finding that most of those weren't getting to adoption because the level of support that families just need in that placement time is so high. And so one of the first changes we made 10 years ago was that we follow families to adoption now. We support them all the way to standing by their side in court on adoption day. So it was
Because
just
you
kind of,
tried it and learned. Yeah.
yeah. And
Wow.
so that's where it was when I came in, and we've just grown and expanded since then. At that time, there was only 2 recruiters. We now have 5. So while we're still only in St. Louis, we're serving significantly more children and families with 5 recruiters.
Wow. So I'm thinking like your whole childhood, your mom's like, listen, here's kind of the vision. I'm kind of charging you with what has become her own mission that she sees how you can be part of that. And you didn't just hear it. Like, I'm amazed that in high school you were like, I want to go to the child. I want to go see what social service is like up front and center. Like, that's absolutely amazing. And I think that's even a note to those of us that are parents of like how we can help our kids kind of see where they can do something impactful and or at least learn about an area of like what society really is like and where there are needs. And so I want to kind of, because you touched on a little bit on extreme recruitment and this 30 days to family, can you kind of give us a little like really simple way to understand what extreme recruitment is? Like, what is the program?
Yeah. So Extreme Recruitment is an adoption recruitment program. It was created under the idea that kids stay in care way too long. That by the time that, they've gone through the process of trying to reunify with their parents and have rights terminated, that more kids were aging out of care, staying in care way too long. And foster care is intended to be a temporary thing. Unfortunately, we were seeing trends that wasn't the case. So the idea was initially based off the Extreme Home Makeover show that like if somebody could build a whole house in a weekend, like why can't we match all these kids that are waiting to be adopted with all these families that want to adopt in a faster way? So we're decreasing the length of time in care, the resources being used, and also, I mean, ultimately kids just deserve to have family and get them there sooner so they can really heal. So that
Absolutely.
was the precedent that created it.
I didn't know the
And
link between extreme home makeover. That's why the word extreme is there.
mhm.
Okay, that's awesome.
Yeah, that's a credit to our CEO, Melanie Sheets. It was her idea. But what it essentially means, and the way I like to explain it, is that a lot of times what happens in foster care is we get very stuck on one option. So, like, first we're going to look at family, then we're going to look at maybe people who know the kid but aren't blood related. Then we're going to look at people who've never met the kid but want to adopt. And that's kind of how the system historically has been set up.
Meanwhile, the
And
child or something group is just sitting in care, waiting for you to kind of figure vetting all those different options out, right? So they're
correct.
continually in care. Yeah.
Living kind of in that anxiety of, where's my final resting place going to be?
Mm-hmm.
And so the way I like to explain it is like casting a net out and bringing in all the fish. So instead of doing one by one by one, our program is very focused on simultaneous recruitment, which means that we come in and we look at all the options. So we're looking at biological family, we're looking at anybody, babysitters, bus drivers, principals, and friends of the foster parents, anyone who knows this kid, has seen the light in them, and has a bond with them. And then we're also looking at families who feel called to adopt and are looking to adopt. And we are putting that net out and then bringing in all the options that there are to come together with the team and really pick which family or even backup families are the best fit for this kid. I also really like to toot the horn of our program and my recruiters because we work really closely with youth too. So we visit with them monthly. We build really strong relationships with our youth, and we really want to understand them as humans and people, not just a child in foster care who needs a home. and really be able to impart that really personal approach to the families we're recruiting and letting them know, what is special about this kid and what they need to succeed in life. And I think that sets our program apart a lot too.
And it's interesting because I think for those that might not be as familiar, this is your first time hearing, you might be thinking this makes so much sense. And yet it's so revolutionary because it's not how the system is really set up, as you've mentioned. And so I just get so jazzed about it because I know your outcomes are incredible. Because instead of going, oh, there's this kid, let's hope someone applies, you all are proactively going to their network and to the broader community of like licensed families, and you're trying to figure out like, how can we help this child, and not just say, oh, this one family signed up, but it's really like, who's the best fit? And I think that's just, to me, beautiful. I was not in care myself, but I often think about, if it was me, like, how would I want that? Right. And to me, that's such a humanizing way. Like you mentioned at the end here, where like you really include these kids as part of like the kids are part of their plan, which is beautiful because they should be. It's their voice, it's their life. Similar to how you were given your own voice with your own
Yes.
adoption, which is absolutely incredible. And I'm curious, there's kind of two ways to go here. I'll kind of start with, in terms of, we mentioned earlier that you're working with kids that are hard to place because of their age or special needs, length of time in care. Kind of what kind of criteria or characteristics does that mean that your staff are working with?
Yeah. So we typically are working with kids 8 and older. So there's a pretty big trend countrywide that kids that are 8 and older are harder to find homes for, which is really sad when you think about it, because 8's still pretty young. A lot of
We're
times
in
we're
like what,
off.
third grade, second grade at that
Yeah,
point?
second, third grade.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then we're working with kids who have a lot of trauma. I mean, we can talk about behaviors all day long and what makes parenting some of these kids difficult at time, but the gateway to all of that is trauma. All the kids that we're working with, it had something traumatic that happened for them to have to come into care, as well as the trauma of not being able to return to their parents, which all kids want, initially. And then also just being in care is traumatic. It's not the same life experience that any other child gets all the time. So a lot of the kids that we serve have already been in care for 2 to 4 years. They've already experienced instability and consistency in their education and their placements and their homes and their relationships for several years at the point that we're getting involved. A lot of the kids that we serve in our program haven't had any contact with their family for well over a year or two by the time we get involved. And so they tend to feel very disconnected from who they are, where they came from, which, research shows has a lot of impact on behaviors and development, especially when you
Identity,
consider
belonging,
all of it.
all those confidence, self-esteem. Yeah.
Especially when you consider that 8 to 9 age range is when puberty is kicking in. So life is already hard at that age. And then you add in not knowing where you're going to lay your head at night and what your forever story is going to be. So a lot of the kids we work with, have an elevated level of need that comes from their trauma. And if they don't have that, then they're in a big sibling group, which we find harder to place kids together when they're bigger than a sibling group of 2. So we tend to specialize in bigger sibling groups as well. And then also medical needs. We serve, and even more so in the last couple of years, every year we're serving more and more kids that are likely going to need lifelong care. So kids who have some type of medical or developmental delay or diagnosis that will make it difficult for them to care for themselves as adults. And so those are cases that we see even more special because we're not just looking for parents for them, we're looking literally for forever for them to make sure as adults, teens, all of it, that they're well cared for.
So you're really, you're looking at these categories that I'm curious, because as someone that's adopted siblings, when you say more than 2, what range do you see? 3 to what's kind of the largest sibling group you've tried to help?
The largest sibling group we've ever served in our program was a group of 5. Yeah, we have gotten a referral of up to 6, but and what's interesting too is it's not even just hard if it's a bigger sibling group, but if it's a boy-girl sibling group. A lot of, homes or foster parents will specialize in taking boys or girls, or even when parents adopt, they have that in their head, or space in the home. Like I have a 2-bedroom home, so I could take 2 girls, but not a boy and a girl. So we even find that our age spread and have boys and girls can be kind of difficult too.
That's helpful to understand. I appreciate you sharing that. That's interesting. Yeah, because if you can't share rooms or beds if you're different genders, then that makes
Mhm.
sense that yeah, that's a little more difficult when you're licensed. Interesting. Interesting. Okay. So I'm going to go backwards a little bit because we talked about how you're helping a niece, and that kind of
Yes.
brings all of this very literally close to your home. Like it's you're living this out. And I'm curious how that very direct experience plus, your childhood and your mom and all of that, how does that impact your view on empathy? Because to me, to be you're in this incredible role as a social worker. You and your team, anyone in this role, right, is doing such important work for people, and yet I feel like you're not always on the front cover of all the things, right? Like you're doing the most incredible work to help kids. And so I'm curious for you, has your empathy changed in any way as part of caring for your niece?
Yeah, I would say, when I first started this job, I was very much like, oh, this is your family. Like, you should want to take your family, which is great and all, pretty idealistic young kid. And over the years, as I've grown myself and had my own lived experience, I've recognized that, everyone's situation is so different and what they can offer based on what's going on in their situation is so different. And I would say that taking our niece has really just shown that even more. Like we weren't ready to take a baby into our home. My niece was already in care, and had a place to be. And then my mother-in-law's home burned down. So it was even like another like second layer of like, it wasn't even just like getting the call from the state, like a lot of families experience, or from, my people, like a lot of people experience, but, just my mother-in-law calling and saying her house was on fire and knowing that she was not going to have a home to live in for a while. So, I mean, I think for my husband and I, it has really shown us what it's like when you're not expecting it, which only helps me be able to kind of put myself in the shoes of other family members. And I think also what it's really brought to light for me more than anything is just the help that our relatives need. We've had some barriers in my niece's case, we've had some struggles, but I know the system. And so we've been blessed in the fact that because I know the system really well, I've been able to advocate really well for even simple things like getting her first step services that she needs. But I think we forget sometimes that the families we're serving, they don't know that stuff and they need the help from us.
And your
And
first
so I
steps is
think,
like before parents as teachers, right? It's like helping some of
mhm,
that developmental stuff, which, yep. So for
yeah,
those that might not be in Missouri, you probably have something very similar available as
yeah.
well. Interesting.
And I think my husband a lot of times had said, like, I don't know how I would do this if you were here. Like, I don't know these
Yeah.
questions to ask. And so, well, that's something I always knew in my head. And a lot of our programs here at the coalition are centered around hand holding for relatives and understanding that, like, they woke up to a call one day not knowing, they didn't prep and do training for 3 months or 6 months to decide to do this. They just got a call. I think it's really put to truth, like walking that walk, like how hard this really is and how we more than ever really need to support relatives who want to be there, who want to help and help them find the way to do that, whether it's placement or it's not placement. While we have placement, we've relied on family members to keep our needs, to help us out, to meet gaps, when we're busy, when we're going 4 different ways. And I think that it has really shown me that like families just they need empathy. I think you put the word right on there. They need empathy from us. And they also just need grace. Grace and like, learning what the system is, learning the questions to ask, learning what to do. And I think if we give relatives the empathy, the grace, and then for some of our kids, the training they need, then we can make them just as successful, if not more, than non-relatives in caring for their families.
And I know that when I was getting licensed, there was a couple in my class that they were not blood kin, but they were
Mhm.
fictive kin, which is like you kind of explain this, like maybe you're the coach, the teacher, someone in their life. And I remember they were in class, but they were also very pregnant. And so they were about to have twins, and they had previously, before they were pregnant, had said yes to this. And so this could happen to any listener, or they
Mhm.
might be in the thick of it. I'm curious if you have any encouragement when that yes feels crazy, or you feel like maybe you don't want to say yes when that call on the random happens. Like, do you have any insight you can share with us?
Yeah, I would say, everyone has to decide what's the right fit for them. And one of the things I like about our programs and what I've been able to learn at the coalition is that everybody does have a place. And so I think it's completely fine to take a moment, take a deep breath, think about what's going on and figuring out what's right for you and your family. My husband and I sat down and we talked about it. Not that you can talk your way through all of it, but we talked about like, what does this look like? We weren't expecting this. Is this the time? We sat down and we talked with our kids about it. Like we talked about the fact that their cousin needed somebody to love her and that we didn't know how long that would be. But at the end of the day, that's what she needed was a family that could give her a safe place to sleep every night, that could love her, that could care for her. We made sure our kids were as on board as they could be. Obviously, kids don't have the final say, but we wanted this to be a joint effort and how we could help care for other people in our family, which I think has really helped them with this transition. And I think the other thing is lean on your supports, and see what you have to help you. For social worker, I'm not always the best at asking for help.
I think it's human beings that's like a learned skill,
Um,
right?
so I will say that having my niece has really challenged me to like do better at that. And so, we've really leaned on friends and friends of the family to really help and support us through this. And, it's become this really beautiful thing because a lot of people can say like, my husband and I stepped up for our niece, but the reality is our whole community did. And we wouldn't have been successful at this if our community hadn't stepped in with us. That is what has made us be able to manage this huge life change. Um, like those moments where I'm like, oh, I thought I was done with bottles or diapers, or, we've had that support. And I think if families just kind of look at like where they are in their situation and what they have to give and just be honest. I'll say as a family finder who's worked in this field for a long time, like that's all we can ask of people. Let us know what you can do and then we want to find that place for you. My mother-in-law couldn't keep my niece anymore because our fire was, she doesn't have a house, but she keeps her overnight for us when we need a break or we need a night out. And so I think everyone, if they take the time when they get that call to sit down and just think about like, what is my situation right now? What do I have to give? And then offers what they have. Every single one of those things are going to positively impact these kids and help them have a more secure life and family.
It's so amazing to me. You painted such a wide picture and you gave so much credit, not because I know sometimes when we've adopted children, people think we're the heroes and we're like, actually, no, like I'm nothing special. But you pointed out that in the village, the community and other family members. And I think that's so critical because I think sometimes people, and I have to get there with my own self because my husband's like, we're having two kids, two's good, two's good. But I have to remember that like my no isn't a no, it's just my role might look different, right? Like I might be saying no about this commitment level, but there's so many other ways to step in and to help and ways that we all can be an encouragement and even just be a sounding board. And so I love that you pointed out kind of all the characters and all the support all the way around that community. And on the note of family, so family connections, I know can get pretty tricky. And I know there's not a one size fits all approach, especially when we're talking about the child welfare system. I know my own situation, because Missouri lets us pick, we do not have open communication with the biological family, which is kind of just a boundary we put on. And I'm curious if you could speak to the different types of kind of biological family connections, the different like layers of boundaries and maybe how to navigate them. Because I think especially when you're dealing with kinship and all these other pieces, there's, you've got kids that are coming from one family and whether or not they're placed with someone that is connected to that family or not, there's still people that are still connected to the kid and it can get really challenging to think about how to harness that.
Yeah. So I think I would just start off by saying that I think a really important thing for people to understand if they're looking to adopt is that adoption is a journey. It doesn't have a start point, it doesn't have an end point. The kiddos, their lives didn't end with that TPR and restart with adoption. Like this is their whole journey. And I think if we look at it from that perspective, then it's not a whole lot different than just parenting. You know, like we as parents decide who's a positive influence in our kid's life. We decide who can create that village around them in the same way that I was just talking about a minute ago with my niece. And I think if we can open our idea to the thing that like that could be bio family, that could be that fictive kin, it can be part of the adoptive family's family, then it's easier to see that and see how we can make that happen. And I think most of us might have somebody in our family that like, you know, we wouldn't send our kids over there to spend the night, but they still have a role at a family gathering. And so I think, you know, part of it is just looking at those relationships that are important to youth and how can we safely implement those in their lives. Um, our program works really hard on that. And part of it, that is very much why our recruiters meet so closely with the youth, because from the very beginning of a case, we're talking about the fact that we don't want adoption to be a loss for them any more than it already had to be for it to even be an option on the table. And that we want them to keep everything that's important to them and grow into their family and their village. And so to do that, we talk about like who is in your life that's important to you right now. If that's grandma, okay, what do you do with grandma? What's important to you with grandma? And then we work with those relatives too to prepare them that this kid's being adopted. And if you're not an option, you know, like they may not be in the family, but how can you still be a part of this? And then we work with pre-adoptive parents and adoptive parents on how to meld that into your family. And I think that looks very different. Sometimes it's still supervised visits. Sometimes it's letters. Sometimes it's visits once a year. Sometimes it's keeping the pictures that we found to help piece their story together for them, or the letters that their parents wrote them when they were in care. But the thing that, as a program, that a philosophy that we hold really dear is just that we know from a lot of research and study that kids want to know their identity. And I think for me, that spoke even more true because as much as I respected my mom for making the hard change that she did, and I had a fantabulous adoptive father, I was never once did I ever feel like I was not his kid. I still wanted to know why. I still wanted to know why my dad, my biological dad, wasn't in my life. I wanted to know why he couldn't get it together for me. You know, and that's a journey that I walked to figure out that answer hand in hand with my mom. And I think that's the most advice I could give to parents is that as much as we want to protect our kids and help them, like this is their journey and this is their story, and you have the power to walk that story with them, which means if it doesn't go quite the way you had hoped, you're there to pick up the pieces. Or if it does, you're there to celebrate with them that they have the answers that they've been looking for. And I think that's where family comes in a lot as identity. And if you can provide that to your kids in some way, then it's only going to bring you guys closer and also help them just continue to grow and mature into their own identity.
Which are huge things to digest because listeners, if you're going, oh my goodness, I could not do this. Like, this is so hard. I get this a lot from families I coach that they're like, it has lots of complexity to it. And I think if you're wondering, like, I'm not even there yet in my mind or my heart, like I highly, highly, highly encourage just some self-care, whether that's with a therapist, a coach, a friend, like there's a lot here to unpack. And I think we as the parents have a lot of work to do on ourselves before we can be in a position to help kids go through this. And I think Amanda pointed out really well, like this is just parenting in general, but like, you know, making sure we're unpacking our own experience is a really healthy way, because this can feel daunting. And I've had several couples that like one's on board and the other one's got a lot of questions around what Amanda just asked about. I think it's important to take the time to talk about it. So even creating space to just have that dialogue of could I and would I and what would this be like? It's important. There's a lot of layers to all of these things. And so I'm going to kind of pivot specifically to like, if as a listener wants to go and be part of who's considered, maybe we're not kin or fictive kin, but we just want to adopt kids that are waiting. And I know when my husband and I were licensed, this is years ago, but we were able to like check a box that was like, we would like to adopt. We don't want to be traditional foster parents. And I understand that over time, the path to do that, specifically in Missouri's changed. And then it even gets extra complicated in other states. So there's not like a straight line. I'm curious what guidance you would give to listeners who are certain they want to adopt as a direct path through the foster care system, but they're going, the only thing I see how to do is how to sign up to foster. And that's not what I want to do.
Yeah. I want to speak to it just a little bit because I know it feels really frustrating to families. I've talked to a lot of families, and I think sometimes just knowing the why is helpful. So I think unfortunately what happens when families hit that barrier is it very much feels like we're not wanted. And I just want families to know that that's not true. I think in Missouri and in other states, we're in a really unprecedented time where we have not enough foster homes and not enough places for kids to lay their heads at night. And so, because of that, agencies have really had to pivot and focus on bringing in foster homes so we can be well equipped for the kids coming into care. And so, but I think that we're starting to realize that. So there's a few pilot programs in Missouri that are really focused on this exact thing, on helping families that want to adopt, who aren't looking to foster, who really have it in their heart to adopt. And they're accepting families who are looking to adopt those 8 and older kids, the kids that we know are in the system that are waiting for that permanency. Um, so I think, if you're getting a no, and I know your podcast is countrywide, so I would say this to everyone. Like if you're calling your local office or your coalition or whoever it is that you saw, talking about foster care, and they're saying like, no, we don't do adoption only right now, just ask who is. Most people know. So I know here at the coalition, if you're in the St. Louis or Missouri area, you can call the coalition, and we have a process where we'll have those questions. And then we have partnerships with other agencies that are doing that we can help direct you to. As a whole, most people are going to be able to say, like, this is the agency, this is the one that's doing that.
This is back where your husband's like, I would not know to ask this if I didn't
Right.
know you. And I also just want to also tell people, because this happens a lot. Okay. And there's nothing wrong if this is the heart of the listener. If you're like, I really want to adopt a baby, I want a baby, foster care is not the way to do that. So
it's just not.
Yeah. Go look at infant adoption or international adoption. Cause I get that a lot where people are like, and it's like, and maybe would you want to address kind of why foster care isn't the route for that?
Yeah. So most babies, hopefully reunify. That's a big part of it. Like if you're coming in as a baby, the high hope is you're going to reunify back with your parents, just by the nature of time. But also, most babies get adopted in the foster home they're first placed in. And that's not always true, but it's commonly true because they've been there the whole time. Ideally, they were even placed with family when they first came in, and that's where they stay.
And that legal process, my understanding is too, it takes about 2 years anyway. So that
yes,
who came in as a baby isn't really even getting adopted until age 2+ anyway. So I just want to help listeners know, like, don't
in all the years I've done this, I think the youngest kid I've actually seen get adopted is probably like 3.5, 4. And they probably did come in as a baby just because there are federal timelines that parents have to be able to work through their services. And then by the time that's done, either picking the family or getting through the paperwork. So it's a very accurate statement. And I would say that like there's nothing wrong also with just wanting to adopt a baby, but there's just other programs for that and other places for that do that and do that well. And foster care is just not that place, but foster care is the place for the kids who fall through the cracks, who need those homes and those permanencies, and those kids that are at risk of aging out and never having a family to lay their head at. And I think if that's something that families are wanting to do, that there's always a path forward for that. So I would just really encourage that if you're calling and you're getting told no, understanding that we're also in a very unprecedented worker shortage. So unfortunately, you're probably not always getting the time that you need. But just ask the questions, really. I mean, most people I know in the system, and I'm fortunate enough to even have partnerships outside of the state of Missouri, know which agencies are doing the adoption work for foster care. And so if you ask, you're eventually going to get there.
Just one additional question. That's so helpful too, that it's like, if that's your heart, here's how to do that. And I would add, listeners, to Amanda's point about there is a shortage, and I'm working with a particular family down south in Missouri, and I've really been coaching them on the importance of having empathy while being persistent. And so recognizing that, as you're trying to contact the agency or your licensing worker, their plate overfloweth, but how to be diligent to gracefully follow up and follow up and follow up. And so Amanda's nodding her head. You're not on camera, so you can't see that, but just bring that along the way that, if you're not getting a phone call back, don't take it as a no, just keep following up and give grace in that. Cause they're so overburdened with so many responsibilities all at once. I mean, this is so healthy and so good. So, okay, as we close, can you share ways? So maybe some people are thinking, oh, great, I want to like follow this process of getting licensed and being considered. I really feel called to parent, but not all of us are, right? Some people just really have a heart for kids that are getting overlooked, that are, waiting, and just, are there other ways that people can help, whether they're local here or around the country, ways that they can be helpful to kids that are in care?
Yeah. The first thing I would say too is just, if in your church community, in your community, in your school, that family that's adopted, offer them help. Again, that support piece in that village is such a huge part of this. So if you know someone who's going through that journey, your support, whether it's a listening ear or being the one to babysit sometimes or fill in the gaps, will be just as impactful and help that placement be just as successful. But secondarily, there are lots of opportunities here in Missouri and nationwide. CASA is a really great program that's core advocates for kids in foster care whose job is to connect that kind of humanistic approach that I talked about earlier with kids to the court, and really work closely with kids and make sure that what they want and what's important to them is being heard within the court system as well. And we have phenomenal CASA programs here in the St. Louis area, but that's also a national program. So lots of states and municipalities and cities have a CASA program. Also, I know here in St. Louis specifically, like our mentor programs are really undertapped right now. Big Brothers, Big Sisters, there's a few others that are really struggling to have mentors. And again, ideally you want kids to stay in the same home, but the reality is our kids tend to bounce a lot. But even if you're bouncing and you have that mentor, that big sister that's, staying along with you, that still provides consistency. And so for some people, that's what they can offer. But I've also seen those relationships be some of the most impactful because their relationship isn't based on my ability to manage you 24/7 in this home, but more my ability to support you as who you are and walk through this system with you. Which means that, you're always there, you're dependable, and kids know that they can depend on an adult. So those types of programs are really helpful. We also have lots of opportunities for volunteering at the coalition. Some of them aren't directly with kids, but they all help us be able to continue to serve our programs and support families to the best of our ability.
Maybe across the country, if you just look at like foster care agency in your zip code or city, you can probably find some opportunity within those organizations as well.
The other thing I would really recommend is respite. So in case people don't know what respite is, foster parents have the ability to get a little bit of a break and have kids go to another home for the weekend. And the process to get licensed for respite doesn't have to be as extensive as a full foster parent. It's not a commitment that you're going to have a kid every day, but it really helps when kids don't have anywhere to go to take an emergency placement for 3 to 5 days, or to be able to take a kid for a weekend so that other parent who's, just kind of needs to breathe for a minute and regroup and walk back into this journey can have that break. And we're at an all-time low of respite options in Missouri too. So for some people, that's just a little easier because it's a weekend and it's only when you're available and you have the time.
And it's also a really good first step because my husband and I did that while we were getting licensed. It was a pretty light application, but we took care of an 8-year-old that was just a single guy who was moving with grandma across state. So he was just waiting for legal stuff to process. And then we had 2 brothers that were 4 and 8. And there was a snowstorm when we had the brothers. And my husband was a teacher, so he had no school too. So I was like, you got to figure out what to do. So, but it gave us, I say that because it gives a great opportunity to kind of feel out, like, is this a lightweight? Maybe I'm an empty nester. Maybe I have a few extra bedrooms or whatever. I can help in a small way. I can still keep my travel schedule. But you also might be like, I might want to make a longer commitment, but I don't know. And instead of having to talk yourself in or out of it, you can kind of try this on and be helpful in this way. And so that way you can kind of get a more realistic feel for everything. Those are great ideas, Amanda. Very practical. It's been so neat to be able to hear about your own, thank you too for sharing your own personal just heart and life, and then how you're doing this in your own home and how you've been part of extreme recruitment pretty much from the beginning. It's amazing. And I'm so proud of Missouri and what the coalition is doing to lead the country to look at a very thoughtful way to help kids who deserve permanency and being with a family for their lifetime, just like everyone else, and how you're really making a priority for kids that are kind of getting stuck. And so I just want to say thank you to you, your team, the organization, and thanks for coming on the podcast.
Yeah, no, thank you for sharing the need with the community. Everyone has a part to play. And I think as long as we really take a community approach, no matter what your time commitment is or your ability is, we can all kind of lift our community and these kids in care back up. So I appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you so much for spending time with us. It truly matters that you listen today, because by tuning in, you're opening your heart to the stories of children in foster care, sparking empathy and starting to see how your unique role, whether as a friend, advocate, or even as a future adoptive parent, can bring hope and belonging to a child or sibling group that is waiting. I also want to personally invite you to reach out to me to ask anything that's on your heart. I promise no judgment. You can find me on Facebook, LinkedIn, and Instagram, and I mean it when I say you can ask anything. I know it can feel awkward to ask questions publicly, and that's why I carve out time during my lunch hour and evenings while my kids and husband are at martial arts to mentor others one-on-one. Your questions matter, your curiosity matters, and most importantly, the role you are playing in helping children in foster care matters. Together, we can bring hope and belonging. Until next time, take care and keep the conversation going.